Julie Inman Grant, Malcolm Turnbull's eSafety commissioner, has been in the news lately. An unelected official, she seems to think she can force people across the world to obey her under threat of having to pay astronomically large fines. Australia is probably being held up to ridicule around the world over this. The first of her actions to be noticed in the media was a very curious order to take down a post made by a Canadian on X, which is now the new name for Twitter. The Canadian, Chris Elston, shared a Daily Mail story about Teddy Cook, a female-to-male trans-Australian activist. Teddy landed a job on a World Health Organization panel as an expert in relation to guidelines for trans and non-binary people. Teddy Cook describes himself as a professional queer, a man of trans experience. He says Australian taxpayers should pay for all sex change operations demanded in Australia. The Daily Mail says his now private media post included a man apparently having sex with a dog. eSafety Commissioner Julie Inman Grant demanded the post be removed within 24 hours, under pain of Twitter or X being fined almost $800,000. Now, Miss Grant, said to be an American, has ordered that X take down a video of the stabbing of the Assyrian bishop in Sydney. Elon Musk has refused. In the face of his refusal, the Prime Minister is arguing that so-called misinformation must not be allowed. He abuses Elon Musk as a narcissistic billionaire, just as he called the first chairman of the Productivity Commission a flat earther, when he challenged pouring $1 billion of taxpayers' money to build solar panels just when the bottom of the market had fallen for these out. He's also called opponents of the voice referendum as racists. The Prime Minister's justification for the ban on the video of the church stabbing is misinformation. Well, what misinformation was there? There's no misinformation in that video. No more than there was misinformation in the terrible film of 9/11 where you saw planes flying into buildings in New York and where people were jumping out of buildings, falling out of buildings. A terrible, terrible scene. Or even worse, the little 9-year-old girl in the Vietnam War who's covered with burning napalm, running down a street and screaming in agony. That changed the position of many people in the West in relation to the Vietnam War. But we needed to see both of these so that we could form proper opinions in relation to these matters. We fortunately didn't have an eSafety commissar to ban these at that time. And we've seen and read and heard what the Australian called a raft of hate speech sermons from Islamic leaders across southwest Sydney. But neither the Albanese government nor the Minns government in New South Wales will take action against them. So we must see them, we must see what is being said, the sort of hate speech which is appearing and creating a wave of anti-Semitism in Australia. It's probable that the bishop stabbing video is being targeted for no other reason than the coming election. Everything said or done now seems to be in the light of the election. The government is fearful of the Muslim vote in 29 seats in Australia, all of which have a significant Muslim presence from 5% upwards. The Prime Minister seems to assume that Muslims vote on the basis of anti-Semitism and oppose Israeli actions in Gaza. It is, of course, absolutely wrong of him to assume this and unfair to the Islamic and Muslim people. Meanwhile, and actually during all of this, the Prime Minister is planning to push the government's Misinformation bill. This is to censor the media, especially that part of the media which relates to criticism of the government. The Prime Minister has even stooped to censoring memes caricaturing him.
Media platforms have a responsibility to make sure that misinformation isn't got out there. I noticed today, for example, on the way up here, they've removed various sites that were up containing fake images of myself superimposed on other people. That's the sort of thing that is going on social media. Social media has a responsibility to do the right thing here.
Did you catch up with Premier Daniel?
Prime Minister, that wasn't misinformation. That was people having fun at your expense. Can't you take it? If you can't take it, Prime Minister, you shouldn't be in politics. Now, the Albanese government is now clearly using the church stabbing to introduce control over political speech in Australia. Clearly, they don't want it known and understood that the government is acting to ensure, through its immigration policy, that housings and rents are beyond the scope of ordinary Australians, the ordinary Australians they claim to represent. They clearly do not want it understood that they are replacing an electricity system which was one of the cheapest and most reliable in the world for one which is one of the most expensive and increasingly unreliable. They clearly don't want it known that they are leaving this country significantly more defenceless than they found it when they came to office. And they clearly don't want it known that they are seizing prime agricultural land and then causing enormous environmental damage with their massive transmission lines across the country. Transmission lines which, if they are ever useful, will be useless in just over a decade. The solution that the government has chosen is to distract us by attacking Elon Musk and X, or as it was called, Twitter. Accordingly, the Assistant Treasurer, Stephen Jones, says X, Twitter, has become a playground for criminals and cranks. It's become a factory for trolls and bots and misinformation. This recalls Hillary Clinton in the presidential election, who declared anyone who voted against her as coming from a basket of deplorables. But before Elon Musk took over the ownership of X, that is Twitter, it had joined in the last election with other parts of the American mainstream media to become the propaganda arm of the Democratic Party. It even joined in hiding the Hunter Biden laptop, which provided very cogent evidence that Joe Biden had turned the Biden family into an illicit machine to sell access and influence in Washington at the highest levels of the United States administration to foreign billionaires close to corrupt foreign regimes, including Russia and Communist China. In response to a reporter asking about the First Amendment implications of her takedown order, Miss Inman Grant said the First Amendment has no application in Australia. That's the First Amendment to the American Constitution. Now, Australia doesn't have a First Amendment, admittedly, but it does have an implied protection of political speech. Australians are not going to be gagged by the Commissar, and they will be wide awake to the Albanese government trying to stamp out criticism of the government. We just cannot tolerate the eSafety Commissar gagging free speech in this, our country.